Okay, good morning, members. Welcome to today's GLA Oversight Committee meeting. Item 1 is apologies for absence and Chairman's announcements. I received apologies from Assembly Member O'Connell, for whom Assembly Member Hall has agreed to substitute. Assembly Member Berry has let me know that she will be slightly late, and Assembly Member Whittle is running late as well, but we are expecting both of them. There are no further announcements. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Members, can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members? And if there are any other disclosable pecuniary interests in specific items listed on the agenda, can you make them aware now, please? I'll take that as none. Item 3 is minutes. Can we confirm the the minutes of the meeting on the 11th of December to be signed by me as a correct record? Agreed. Thank you. Item 4 is the summary list of actions. Can we note the completed and outstanding actions arising from the previous meetings of the GLA Oversight Committee? Agreed. Okay, item 5 is the Q&A section of today's agenda with Mayoral directors who we haven't questioned before. Nick Bowes has appeared before, so I should introduce you before I start talking about you. Nick Bowes is the Mayoral Director of Policy, and Patrick Hennessy is the Mayoral Director of Communications. As I was saying, Nick has appeared in front of committees before, but I can't actually recall hearing from you at that committee, but that's fine. We're going to hear from you in a moment. And of course, Patrick, I think this is your first time appearing in front of committee. We're going to start, I think we're going to do you one at a time. And we're going to start with you, Patrick. And I think Assembly Member Hall is going to start the ball rolling on this.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. Patrick, how would you describe your media strategy for promoting what the Mayor is doing for London, and what do you see as the most important platform for promoting what the Mayor does?
Thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity, yourself and the Chair, to come and answer these questions. I think that if I may say about the overall strategy is basically, the overall media strategy is to promote the Mayor's work, his key priorities, his main messaging, with as an effective a communications strategy as we possibly can. In terms of how does this take shape? We've got a responsibility, I think, to make sure Londoners are kept informed and completely engaged with the work of the Mayor and the London Assembly. In terms of how the press team works and does this, it provides, I think, a key accountability service to Londoners via the media as well, answering their queries promptly and accurately, as well as correcting inaccuracies that might mislead them about the work of City Hall and the Assembly, and the proactive communications of the Mayor's key policies, key priorities and services along the lines of his key priorities, which obviously include crime, policing, transport, housing, and air quality, which are also the issues, I think, that most preoccupy Londoners.
Okay, given that list, he seems, and I've said it before, to be completely obsessed with Brexit. We hear far more from him about Brexit than all of what you're saying are his key priorities. Is that your idea? Is it his obsession? Do you share the obsession?
I wouldn't characterise it like that. I think that Brexit, the result of the Brexit election, the Brexit referendum shortly after Sadiq came to office was quite unexpected. Obviously had a big impact on the city in terms of the future, the uncertainty that it gave to businesses. And I think it was very important for the Mayor, who was elected on a platform of remaining, to explain his priorities, his views when it came to Brexit, and its effect on London. It's a huge decision taken by the British people that will have a massive impact on Londoners going forward, and the Mayor's role in that, I think, is absolutely crucial.
Well, it wasn't unexpected by very, very many of us, clearly the majority of us. But I go back to the point. You say he keeps going on about his his key policies, but my point is he doesn't. He keeps going on about Brexit. And as I say, is that your desire for him to do that, to make sure that the public don't realise how he's failing so badly on his key priorities? Or is it down to him that he keeps going on about Brexit?
I don't accept that he keeps going on about Brexit at the expense of his other key policies at all, and it's decisions about the interventions he makes and how he communicates is down to him.
Okay, do you want to answer next?
Yeah, just if I can take up a point in relation to what you've just said. Part of your role is to correct inaccuracies and issues that are misleading. You would have read the article, I think it was in The Guardian, where the Mayor once again claimed that he'd frozen fares for Londoners and that Londoners would pay no more this year than they did last year. That he's frozen all TfL fares. I mean, that is actually a lie, as you well know. Did you not have a hand in correcting that inaccuracy? And
could I just intervene on that, Assemblyman Prince? I think lie is quite a loaded word. Misleading, perhaps?
Well, I'm not accusing anyone of lying. I'm saying it is a lie. I'm not saying anyone has lied. I'm saying it is a lie that all the fares have been frozen.
Okay. Just as Chair, I'm just offering that warning. It's entirely up to you
I
how you
appreciate
phrase
that.
things.
Thank you. But I do appreciate. I'm not accusing anyone of lying. I'm just saying it is a lie.
Thanks for that question, Assembly Member Prince. I think it was the article you were referring to was in the Independent, not the Guardian. I didn't have any role in that. That was a political intervention, and as such, that was overseen and delivered by London Labour Party.
Right. Would you, if such a quote were to be used within your remit, would you correct that?
Well, that's a hypothetical situation. I mean, obviously, I and the press office would correct any inaccuracy that would seek to correct any inaccuracy that was in any media about the Mayor or the work of City Hall.
But you would accept that not all TfL's fares have been frozen and that members of the public do pay more.
I mean, this isn't a question I don't think covered by the scope of this, Chair. This is a question on. Yeah,
I think if we can keep questions related to the role of the mayoral directors.
Well,
I said I didn't have a role.
You just said his role was to correct inaccuracies and misleading.
As I said, I didn't have a role in that.
No, I appreciate
that particular article that you were referring to in the Independent at all.
But I was just curious if such an article which would come under your remit, whether you would feel the need to correct it.
Well, it hasn't.
I gather all the information I need to from your answer. Thank you. So, what are the strategic and day-to-day decision-making structures within the Mayor's Office on communications, please?
In terms of strategy and day-to-day decision-making, so, I mean, I would describe my role as providing strategy, direction, and oversight to the press office. That'll obviously take the form of face-to-face meetings, many of them, and other forms of communication. I work very closely with my fellow mayoral directors to make sure the Mayor's external, digital, stakeholder, policy, international press work is joined up and pursuing, as I've said, the Mayor's core objectives. I'll sign off content going out in the Mayor's and Deputy Mayor's names, as well as mayoral spokesperson quote, but I must emphasise anything that goes out in his name is signed off ultimately by him. And I will also sign off digital and marketing content to check it's appropriate for the GLA in pursuing the Mayor's core objectives, although I'm not actually the director in charge of the digital output.
So can you just, I'll just pick you up on that, can you just confirm what you said there? You're saying that anything that goes out in his name is signed off by him?
Yes, in his name, yeah.
All right, that's. I think we've heard contrary to that in the past, but that's interesting. Thank you very much. That's me. Thank you.
I saw Assemblymember Copley, and then I'll come back to Assemblymember Hall.
It's just Assemblymember Hall was making this assertion about the amount of time the Mayor talks about Brexit. I've just gone back through the last 6 days of the Mayor's tweets because I got bored after 6 days. He's tweeted about Brexit 4 times, housing and homelessness 14 times, And actually, out of 28 tweets, only 4 of them relate to Brexit. So I just thought a point of information for the committee. I don't think the Mayor's talking about Brexit all the time. In fact, he's mostly been tweeting online about cold weather shelters.
Okay, thank you for that point of information. We are indebted to you for it. Assembly Member Hall.
Okay, I'm interested to hear that one of the Labour Assembly members is bored by the Mayor's Twitter account.
I'm bored by Twitter in general,
Aren't
Susan.
we all? Anyway, I am, I'll go back to you, Patrick. I am curious to see that in answer to a written response from a mayoral question of mine, asking to see his media grid for 6 months, I was told that there was no such document that existed. Do you not believe in media grids? Every media person I've ever come across with this sort of job has media grids.
I think what we do is we will have a regular meeting where daily where issues like this are discussed, where in terms of interventions, in terms of that day's announcements, it could be an announcement from the government, could be an announcement from where, in terms of reactive quotes that will need to be got ready and prepared, and that's a meeting that's attended by a sort of variable cast of characters, but will normally include mayoral directors, senior people in the press office, members of the digital team, etc. And I'd describe that as a planning meeting.
So going forward, do you not have a grid of sorts, or what would you call it? What would you call your forward plan for communication?
There's various communication plans that look forward over a period of days, for example.
And what would you call that?
I'd call that planning document.
So if I asked to see it, that's what I would refer to it as, and then I can't be told you haven't got one.
You can ask to see what you'd like to ask to see.
Okay, that's great, thank you. The mayor has sometimes been criticised as being the selfie mayor because he constantly takes selfies. Is that part of your communication strategy?
Could I just say something about sort of social media, really, as well as selfies? If you look at I've held my entire career has been in news and media, and it goes back rather a long time, longer than I care to remember. I've never known a media environment that is as rapidly changing as this one. Social media is intensely important in terms of communication now. For example, I've got some figures here that show this really. It also shows the big demand that has risen significantly for the press office and the entire operation around the GLA. 84% of 18 to 24-year-olds, 62% of 25 to 34-year-olds, 53% of 34 to 40-year-olds, and 31% of those older. And London is a young city, as you'll be aware, with a younger than average age than is the case in the rest of the country. Their online media is now their main source of news. My children and people older than them no longer get their news from bits of paper. Online media and the rise of social media is massively important, and I don't think any communications strategy or tactics can ignore it. In terms of selfies, the mayor gets invited to a lot of events. He does a lot of events. He turns up. He's a popular figure, and people are going to ask him for selfies.
Okay,
They never asked Boris Johnson, of course.
Didn't hear that.
Carry on.
Thank you. So, Patrick, what advice do you give to the mayor on how to respond when London is hit by a terrorist outrage or a tragedy?
Very good question. Thank you very much. I think this is absolutely key. I think, if I can say so at this stage, Assembly Member Prince, this is where I think we are, as a communications and media organisations, most tested in terms of in terms of a terrorist attack or a major emergency. What happens there is that a key group is immediately convened, which will include the Chief of Staff, will include the Chief Executive, will include the Mayoral Directors, will include senior officials on press communication as well as policy, other key areas. And that is the sort of hub where all the available information is brought in from the police, the emergency services, the first responders, and everybody else comes in there. Then, as that is happening, I will draw up a communication strategy for the following hours and the following up to probably 24 hours in the first instance. And that will then I will discuss and advise the Mayor on that. And we will go forward. So two things I'd say about that. One is that in circumstances like that, it's absolutely vital, I think, that the Mayor puts out a message, first of all, of reassurance, and secondly, of information. How do people, how do they get around? What should they do? What is the latest information from the confirmed sources of the police and the emergency service? And it's very important that in that situation, we put out quick, accurate, and reassuring statements, very, very important to the public. And it's also important, I think, that he then communicates with as large a number of media outlets as he possibly can, given obviously his other priorities as well. But that is a very, very key point. So you would see then he would do broadcast and media rounds very, very extensively, and obviously that would not be confined to the local media we deal with all the time, the national media that we deal with slightly less frequently but still very frequently, but also the international media at that stage. So you would see CNN, AP, for example, being part of that big media round, because obviously big international story that has big international repercussions. But the key thing is to get the information very quickly, be confident that what you are putting out is 100% accurate and reassuring, and spread it as widely as possible. And that's something you only really learn with experience. And the press office plays an absolutely key role in that. As we're all aware, there was a period in throughout 2017 where London was hit by the disasters of Grenfell and Sandilands, or Sandilands a bit before, 4 terrorist attacks. Press office playing an absolutely key role in that, and I would like to pay tribute to them for their very, very hard work round the clock, keeping the Mayor advised, up to date, fully briefed, etc.
Right, thank you. I mean, that's very helpful, and I agree. It's very important that we get accurate, reassuring messages out ASAP to as many people as we possibly can. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you tell me what your key relationships within the GLA are, and how you work with the deputy mayors and MOPAC, for example, to feed into their communication decision?
Yes, process? I can. Thank you, Assembly Member Hall, for focusing on that area. I mean, inside the GLA, as well as obviously meeting with and briefing the Mayor, I meet with the deputy mayors, and I meet with senior policy officials and the press team serving each of their areas on a bi-weekly basis. These meetings are very vital in making sure that we've got a coherent media strategy in place for each of these policy areas, that key issues are flagged earlier on, for example. The key thing is to join up the comms, and to join up the comms with other GLA bodies and key partners. So to that extent, I'm also in very, very regular contact, both as part of a larger group and individually with my opposite numbers in MOPAC, TfL, LLDC, the fire service, etc., as well as, if you permit me to go slightly wider, my opposite numbers in key bodies outside, such as the corporation, the Centre for London, business organisations such as London First, etc. It's a very, very key part of my job, and I'm very regularly in touch with them, both through meetings, through phone calls, etc.
And do you have any issues with any of them if they want to put out something that doesn't quite fit into the mayoral view, etc.? And can you give me any examples of that?
I think what we do is we will always try and come to a consensus. I mean, if you're looking in terms of the police, anything operationally that the police does or the police put out is a matter for them. But obviously, anything involving strategy or oversight, we would see. We would consult about in advance. And in terms of TfL, well, the mayor is chair of TfL, so the key announcements that TfL put out and the information that they can spread through those announcements. I'm particularly thinking of the ULEZ, for example. That is very much a sort of focus of joint working. I've got some information about the ULEZ, for example, which I think it's very key to stress how we need to raise awareness in this, and we will test awareness, both TfL and ourselves. So, for example, following a renewed push on ULEZ comms, with the deadline for the start of the ULEZ in the central section rapidly approaching on April the 8th. For example, over 2 million people have now checked whether their vehicle will be subject to the charge using the TfL vehicle checker. That's something that's very important to us.
Yes, I'm glad you brought up the ULEZ, because I was going to bring it up. Are you not still very concerned that there are thousands out there that are unaware of it and are going to be caught blindsided by it?
I think no. I mean, I'm confident. I think there always is a challenge in raising awareness of such a key policy. For example, if I can go, we've already seen improvements from the last time we checked. So from August 2018 to November 2018, there's been a raise in awareness for this. I've got the exact figure here, but I can't quite find them. I can let you have that later. So 2.5 million registered congestion charges users are being contacted if their vehicles do not meet the ULEZ standards. TfL is checking, is contacting other drivers. More than 300 ULEZ warning signs, that we get technical, are being installed across central London. Businesses are being made aware. There's a big campaign going on using social media, using the traditional media, using advertising across print, radio and online video. We're absolutely doing everything we can, pulling out all the stops to raise awareness on this. So I've found the stats now, sorry for not having them earlier. In August 2018, awareness of this was at 50%. In November, it was at 60%, and we will shortly have another estimate on that too, which we can share with you.
Okay, if the estimate doesn't show much higher, what's your plan B?
Well, that was between August and November. So the plan B, if you like, which is part of the main plan, is the big New Year push, which is already underway. So we haven't seen the figure on that yet.
Okay, and I'm being contacted by people that say they've gone onto the checker and it says their vehicle's fine, and they've gone on to a different way of checking and it said it's not fine. So have you found much in the way of issues with that checker?
I personally haven't, but you would have to ask TfL about that. Is there the technicalities of that, of their checker? We can do what we can with the media to publicise it, and to publicise the introduction of the ULEZ through, as I said, through traditional media, through social media, visits by Sadiq, where we take the media along, and obviously everything in terms of the ULEZ, we like to see through the fact that it is a public health problem, that the ULEZ is part of the solution to.
Well, can I respectfully suggest that you ask TfL about that? Because if there are problems with the vehicle checker, it's going to be a massive problem for the communications from the GLA. So I think that's something that should be looked at, unless I happen to have just had the people that have had issues with checking with their vehicle.
Of course, and of course I will. Thanks for raising it, but I just say I haven't heard internally of any problems with it. But yes, absolutely, we'll check that out.
Okay, my colleague wants to ask.
Reverend Prince.
Thank you. Just on the ULEZ, if I can, you're quite right. I've seen a lot of the red signs that are stuck underneath the congestion charge signs, and I think actually they're very good, except all they say is like ULEZ coming to you soon on the 12th of April, but doesn't actually, there's no information, so it might be helpful if perhaps there could be some direction, so for more information, visit TfL or something, just so that people would know, because they'll see the sign, but they won't understand what it is. They won't know what it means, and it would just be useful, I think, because I think it's good that you've got the sign, but I think it'd be even better if we could just have something to point people as to where they could go and check to see what it means or whether there's any ramifications.
Very, very happy to take that up with TfL. One thing I also would point out is that I think that there are, I know they are because I see them, the more changeable digital signs on the side of main roads. I'm a user of the A3, and I see it on those, and I think they have slightly more information than the fixed signs.
I think most of those at the moment are saying Rotherhithe Tunnel is closed.
Well,
So
they're saying they're probably
you're
not,
right. They have said it in the but
they're probably not saying that on the
They're
A3.
being used to something more important at the moment around that I've seen anyway.
Very good.
North and south of the river.
No, these are all very good points, and I'm very happy to take them up with TfL.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
Just a couple of tidying up questions, if I may. Sorry, did you want to come back in? Because I can
I
save
always
those
do,
until
but
later.
if you want to, Chairman, no. Yeah, please.
Just
You have a
on
turn.
on that last point from Assemblymember Prince, your role, as I understand it, and from what you said today, is to oversee the Mayor's corporate output from this building. The line of questioning just now was about the operational output of the functional bodies. ULEZ was given as an example. How much interface do you have with things like that? So would it be reasonable for people to assume that you've had some oversight or knowledge of signs that are being put up to advertise the ultra low emission zone or anything like that? I mean, great if you can take stuff back if there's problems with that, but would you normally be expected to have been involved in that at some point? And if not, maybe should you, or what are your thoughts?
No, I think it would be something I would be aware of. As I've said earlier, marketing and campaigning don't actually fall under me. They fall under the Director for External and International Affairs, and that also takes in sort of proactive digital, as it were, digital-only communications. If there's a digital communication that is tied in with a media story, a media event, something written by Sadiq that we want to publicise, I mean, obviously I oversee that, but I don't have direct responsibility in those areas.
Okay, but something like the signs on the approach to the boundary of the ultra low emission zone would be a TfL operational thing rather than for you, but if you were driving along and you spotted a sign that was misleading or wrong, as Assemblymember Prince just indicated, would that be then down to you to pick up with TfL, or how does that work?
Well, I would probably, I would pick it up with TfL certainly, and as I've said to Assemblymember Hall and Prince, I will make these points.
Okay, come back to Assemblymember Hall, and then if she doesn't cover what I'm thinking about, I'll sweep up at the end.
Okay. Can you tell me what you're measured on during your annual appraisal with David Bellamy?
It's probably a question for him. I mean, what can I say? What I measure what I would measure myself on?
Well, bearing in mind is he your boss or is Sadiq Khan? Which one do you talk to the most?
He's my
line manager, as it were.
Yeah, David is my line manager. Obviously have regular meetings and chats with David. But you know, my central role, if you like, is Sadiq's communications most senior communications advisor and his spokesperson.
Okay, so to go back to the question then, and you can answer it in two. Both what does David Bellamy measure you on, and then what do you measure yourself on?
Well, I mean, my principal accountabilities are stuff that we have covered before, that I have to lead the development and implementation of the comms strategy. I provide advice to the mayor, mayoral appointees, executive directors on media and comms policy. I lead the development and implementation of the GLA's media strategy to promote a positive image of the authority with a wide range of media. Devise and help implement media campaigns to support policy issues, advise the mayor, liaise with the government and with London agencies, and I lead on the development and implementation of media strategies for the press office. And a key one, which we haven't mentioned before actually, today is to realise the benefits of London's diversity, to promote and enable equality of opportunities and promote the diverse needs and aspirations of communities, which I think is a very key one, and it's something we give a lot of thought and a lot of time to, how we best engage community and diaspora media. So what would I see how do I judge my own deliverables, etc. Well, my number one priority is reaching Londoners of all ages and all backgrounds with City Hall's messages, and a lot of work goes into targeting how we target various interventions and statements at various groups of Londoners, at various communities. For example, I've mentioned communities and diaspora media. We're very, very keen to reach local newspapers, whether it's in print or online, growing. It shows Londoners have a high level of, research shows, that Londoners have a high level of trust in local newspapers, local news organisations. In the wake of, dare I mention it, Brexit, and maintaining foreign confidence in London, the engagement with international media is important. I mean, one of the key deliverables for me is I want the majority of Londoners to have seen or heard from the mayor every month, and I want that figure to meaningfully increase this year, and it did in terms of December 2018 compared with December 2017.
Okay.
On that, how do you measure that?
That's measured by regular polling and tracking that's done by the GLA Intelligence Unit.
So polling, tracking of what?
So, for example, if we track, I can give you an example of how we track interventions. Picking one, for example, the launch of the Violence Reduction Unit, which obviously was a very, very key piece of work and policy innovation, which was launched in September last year, on September the 19th. And we have tracked the coverage of it across a range of platforms, whether it's print, online, etc., with a lot of numbers of unique daily browsers, readers, etc. There's, on this particular example, there's pages of list of the coverage and how many people it reached. It's very, very extensive. So we will track these big announcements on the key policy areas to see how many people they are reaching through the media.
The GLA Intelligence Unit does regular polling. presumably the usual representative sample of 1,200 people or whatever it is, on key messaging or on whether they've heard of the Mayor this month, or how does that work?
A mixture.
Sorry?
A mixture.
Mixture.
Yeah.
How often do they do that?
They do regular. I'm not in charge of this operation, but obviously the information is useful. Monthly and some questions quarterly, I believe. But as I said, I'm not in charge of it.
Okay. Is that a new innovation, or is that
no?
been
That's something that's
pre-existing
happened
precedent
for
a while?
many years.
Okay. Did you have anything further?
Just briefly, do you know how much money is spent, obviously because it's taxpayers' money, on tracking the popularity of the Mayor?
No, I don't.
Could it be found out?
Yes, I will find out.
Lovely, thank you.
Assemblymember Whittle.
Yes. Morning, Patrick. Do you go with the Mayor on his various trips to other countries that he's taken?
I have been once abroad with him, but not on others.
I see. So somebody else goes to does his press for him when he's wherever he's in the States or India.
In the States, it was me. In India, it wasn't.
Do you sort of track his success there in terms of the amount of media hits he gets about it here or there?
Both.
Which one, therefore, would you say was, in terms of media hits, the most successful of his trips then?
I don't have the exact on in hand, but I know that all his trips, which obviously one should always remember, are designed to bang the drum for London and see him acting as an ambassador for London at very uncertain times in the world, and will involve bringing business representatives with him or as part of the trip. I'd say they've all engendered a lot of positive coverage both here and where he has gone. Obviously, he's accompanied on trips by representatives of our own media, and that's another way. Obviously, that's the main way of spreading the message back here about him banging the drum for London.
Finally, just as a point of interest on that, say you went to America with him. Is it a case that with the American media, do you have to sort of sell him to them, in the sense that you have to say, hey, guess what, we've got this guy here who's the Mayor of London, etc. Go on, have him on. Or do you find they're quite welcoming? I.e., do they know who he is?
Oh, it's a mixture of both. He's a well-known figure around the world, as you'll be aware. Obviously, we take steps to publicise what he is and where he's going and what he's doing locally. But he's been on prime time when we were in America. He was on prime time American breakfast TV and numerous other interactions with the American media, and they were pleased to have him on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are through with you now, Patrick. You can take a breath, and Nick, it's your moment to shine. So I think probably the best way to start it is for you to give an outline of what your role is as you interpret it.
Yeah, sure. Just to echo what Patrick said at the beginning, just to thank you for inviting me here today to talk about my role and to ask questions and show an interest in the policy work that goes on in the Mayor's office. So I think there's probably kind of 5 main areas that I would touch on. I think the most important job is my role in helping to coordinate the policy work of the GLA and really support the deputy mayors in their delivery in their particular policy areas. And in addition to that, as per my job description, I act as a interface between the mayor and the authority's policy teams. I'm a point of contact on policy across the organisation for those that want to bring things to the attention of the Mayor's office or just discuss policy items in general. Obviously, I therefore, by working with the deputy mayors, I support the delivery of the mayor's key policy aims, and another area has been my work in helping to coordinate and lead on the delivery of the mayor's strategies, both the statutory and non-statutory strategies, which is always a mouthful, and then ensuring that the mayor gets regular and robust policy advice, and he's adequately briefed on relevant policy issues as and when appropriate.
Okay. Thank you. How do you do that?
The latter or all of it?
The whole
thing.
So if we go through it in turn, so
Yeah.
you coordinate policy and you support the deputy mayors. How does that work?
So with the deputy mayors, I meet all the deputy mayors on a rolling fortnightly basis, on a one-to-one basis, where we will discuss pressing policy issues, issues that are in need of coordination across teams, anything that's arising, delivery against the mayor's policy aims. Then there are a couple of areas where there's a lot of cross team working. I think air quality is probably quite a good example of that, where one of the first things I did after May 2016 was actually bring together all of the teams that have got a stake in the air quality work, which is more than just the environment team. So it was the transport team, the health team, you had TfL in there, and actually that group has continued to meet and has driven forward that work on air quality. Because I think previously there wasn't always necessarily the same tendency to perhaps work together across teams. I mean, it's a natural tendency in organisations sometimes to get siloed. It's partly human nature, and it's my job to try and make sure that doesn't happen. And I think on the air quality, that's a good example of where I've managed to bring the teams together. But similarly on the strategy work, I think one of the things very early on, I was given a very good piece of advice early on, and that was make sure that the mayor's statutory strategies are all singing from the same hymn sheet, so that you don't get contradictions between them, and that there are some threads that run through them, and also that you get the chronology right, because we obviously work up towards the London plan. That work's in progress at the moment, and the housing, transport and environment strategies are probably the key building blocks. So we were really keen to get those statutory strategies written, consulted on and approved by the Assembly early on, so that work on the London plan could progress. And it was my job to make sure that they weren't contradicting each other, that teams were talking to each other, that some of the key themes like healthy streets, health in all policies, good growth were reflected across all of the strategies.
Okay, so on the strategic side, or producing the strategies, that makes very good sense. What about the day-to-day role of strategic and operational decision-making within the Mayor's office? So both of the previous mayors, I believe, had effectively a cabinet structure. So they would meet, the previous mayor met his cabinet every Monday, I think 10 o'clock. So the directors, the deputy mayors, etc., would meet with the mayor, and they would have that kind of function. Does that happen under this mayor?
So the main vehicle for that is the Corporate Investment Board, which meets every Monday morning, which is the formal approval mechanism for policy decisions and spend. And all of the statutory strategies went through that process for approval, and also the consultation reports that were attached to those. So that's the formal.
So who sits on that?
So that's the deputy mayors, the mayoral directors, and the chief of staff chairs it, and then there's also the executive team from City Hall and the chief officer.
So the mayor doesn't sit on it?
No.
Right, okay, so what's the interface between that board then and the mayor?
Well, so the chief of staff will provide the kind of running interface between that and the mayor.
Okay, so decisions aren't reached collectively then? What happens? Recommendations are made and the mayor agrees or not?
On policy, well, I mean, there's not really a single route by which policy comes to CIB, because it, as you can imagine, it depends what type of policy it is, how big it is, how many teams it cuts across. So, you know, work came out of the air quality team that I talked about earlier, recommendations on things that we could do around low emission bus zones, ULEZ, etc.
Yeah.
And then they would go up to the Mayor for his approval, either via the Deputy Mayor Rodriguez, who now chairs that group, or via myself.
Okay, so how much interface do the Deputy Mayors have with the Mayor?
The Deputy Mayors meet with the Mayor
How
on a
often?
regular basis.
How often is regular?
Well, on an individual basis, I don't know exactly how often, but they all have time on their own with him, and then there's a collective meeting as well.
Okay, but you don't know how frequent?
I mean, I couldn't say exactly, no. I mean,
Okay.
but
So when the Deputy Mayors are meeting with the Mayor, are you present in those
No.
meetings? So they do those individually, or
Yeah.
do they do them with their senior officers?
no, they do them individually.
Individually, okay. So for your role, you've given me sort of the description, some of which I think you were quoting from your job spec. What are your key deliverables, though? What are you being tasked with directly?
Well, I mean, I touched on the strategies earlier. That's clearly one of the main deliverables for the job, and I think linked to that is very much the coordination role, just the coordination role in the Mayor's office, stitching together different areas of policy to make sure that they're not contradicting, that they're joined up, and that, you know, there's a lot of instances where we've had to do that. So air quality I've talked about. We've also got the work on the violence reduction unit, which is ongoing at the moment. Lots of stakeholders, both outside and inside of the building, that we've got to make sure are part of that partnership. I mean, I give an example of an area of policy that we've had to that we've developed actually since we've been here. It was actually on the back of a report done by the Assembly Environment Committee, which was on the single-use plastics, and we pulled together a team that involved environment and health and planning teams, because we were really keen to try and take forward some of that work around what we could do on reducing plastic use and delivering water fountains for the city so that people could fill up their water bottles.
Okay. So we're sort of deep into the third year of the administration. From your perspective, what's gone well?
I think that, I mean, I'd like to say that the coordination's gone pretty well. I think, you know, City Hall is blessed with fantastic expertise in its policy teams. I mean, it was one of the things that really struck me really on, was just how lucky we are to have people that work in the policy teams here that, for many of them, it's more than a job, you know, it's a vocation. They actually really love the areas that they work in. And I think that contrasts actually with central government, where you don't always get that same kind of level of expertise, that, and that's, you know, there's a stability in it too. But so I was really determined that we would really try and pull that together as much as we could, and I think I've done a pretty good job on that. I think the strategies are a good illustration of that. And I think also there's a couple of other things perhaps worth just touching on. The nimbleness of the organisation, I think, helped very much in a couple of areas. So we decided, well, the Mayor decided that the Young Londoners, we'd set up the Young Londoners Fund, and we pulled together a team from across the building, education, young people, social policy, various other teams that actually managed and drove that forward, and actually started distributing the money in pretty good time, actually, because from inception to actually getting the thing up and running, but also put in place really good mechanisms for learning from each of the rounds of the money going out, getting feedback from successful and unsuccessful bidders and other stakeholders on how we could refine it and make it better. And there's a round 2 due at some point this year, and hopefully we'll have learned from that and been able to refine it and make it even better.
The flip side of the same question to the one I asked you is, I mean, I know that hindsight is always 20/20, but if you could go back and restart the mayoral term, what would you do differently?
Well, I mean, look, there's always things on a day-to-day basis that sometimes don't go quite as well as you would like them to do, and you know, you learn from those, and you dust yourself down. I think one of the big challenges, and although I think we did pretty well to cope with it is that you can never control for events outside of what goes on in this building. And I think since May 2016, there's been a number of events out of our control, perhaps more in a condensed period of time than either of the previous mayors had to deal with. And I think how you cope with that and continue with business as usual is a real challenge, and it is a stretch because, you know, there was that period, obviously in early 2017, when there were regular events that can become all consuming. And I think if we'd known in advance that it was going to be like that, then you probably would have thought much harder about how you kind of make sure that day-to-day operations are as resourced as they need to be. I think we managed, but it was a stretch. But you could, you know, who could have foreseen that it was going to be like that in 2017? It was a set of circumstances that were beyond our control.
Have you made any changes to the way things function in light of that?
I think we did learn from it. I think one of the things was actually I have a senior advisor that works with me now very closely that I didn't have at that time, which just gives more bandwidth to be able to cope, particularly in those times when the pressure's on, if events out of our control. I didn't have that at that time, so it was, you know, you have to continue doing the kind of day-to-day things, which are really important, as well as obviously supporting the mayor and the organisation in dealing with the aftermath of events beyond our control.
You talked earlier on about your role in policy coordination. What role do you have in policy formulation?
So in terms of policy, I leave the deputy mayors very much to lead on their policy areas, and they know their areas better than I. They're closer to their teams. So I gave you the example of how we kind of responded on the after the report by the Environment Committee on the single-use plastics, and my job there was very much to kind of take that forward and pull together the teams within the building to support the formulation of a set of options of, you know, things that we could do. So I very much try to facilitate the kind of processes that will lead to the policy suggestions and recommendations by the experts in the building who know better than me on a lot of the specific areas.
Just on, I mean, that's an interesting area to think about. So on that one, that specific example that you gave about the single-use plastics report from the Environment Committee, you spotted there was an opportunity there for a mayoral policy development piece of work to go on, and then almost as a in a directional way suggested that the relevant departments should formulate something, or they came to you with something. How does it work?
No, so on that, I think on that one it was very much, I mean, I try very hard to keep on top of the work that comes out of the assemblies and the reports that come out, and on that particular one, I mean, it was exceptionally timely in terms of the report. It came out just as that issue just exploded as an issue, and I think everybody kind of woke up to just actually how important reducing the single-use plastics was. And I think, so I said to the relevant deputy mayors, we need to take this work forward. Let's pull together a team inside the building of the officers who've got an expertise in this area, and let's come forward with a set of options and proposals for the mayor to decide on what to take forward.
So policy work is not static, obviously. Policy can get outdated very, very quickly, and things move at a fast pace. It can't just be down to you to spot policy opportunities. So I'm interested in how the dynamic between you and the deputy mayors works, because I'm imagining they'll have their own ideas and it goes back and forwards. Yeah. It's
a really good point, because so in the formal regular meetings I have with deputy mayors, which are fortnightly, that's the kind of thing that would come forward in those types of discussions, where deputy mayors would bring to the discussion new and evolving policy areas. The other benefit of the way that we work upstairs is that the majority of the deputy mayors are obviously sat broadly in the same area as themselves, as well as us in the mayor's office. I think that kind of just, that interaction on an informal basis also just kind of helps oil the wheels in terms of the exchange of ideas. So yeah, things do come up, bottom up as well. It's definitely not just top down driven. I think, as I said before, the deputy mayors know their areas far better than I do.
Okay. What about your relationships with stakeholders outside this building, so outside the GLA? What sort of relationships do you have, and how do you facilitate those?
So I have good relationships with some of the key organisations that you would expect, like London councils, through the officers there, and through some of the council leaders because of the particular areas that they lead on. I work closely with some of the key think tanks like Centre for London, Centre for Cities, keep having a conversation with them about work that they're doing, things that that might be of interest in terms of new policy ideas, new areas of work. I work with other civil society groups, academics in London, London First, London Cycling Campaign, Client Earth, to name a few. We've also got fairly good relationships with some of the other mayors outside of London. Some of that is personal relationships that I've got. And then obviously there's the relationships with the wider GLA family.
The one area you didn't mention there was government. What are your relationships with government?
So government, yeah. So when the mayor meets with government ministers, secretaries of state, I'm usually in attendance at the same time in those meetings.
But do you meet officials?
Well,
You're an official, so
government relations is actually not in my job description. It's actually in my colleague Jack Stenner's job description. He leads on that area of work closely with our government relations team. There are occasions when I will be in meetings where it's with officers and government officials, and sometimes I have a relationship with government officials, and sometimes that's done officer to officer, sometimes it's deputy mayors who have that relationship. It's all coordinated through the government affairs team.
But policy formulation is critical, and obviously your relationship with the government is absolutely critical as well. Now, we're all realistic people, and sometimes we will understand that there will be policy clashes, and sometimes that is deliberate and sometimes it isn't. But in order to get things done, very often some kind of assimilation of policy is required, isn't it? So what sort of a role do you have with that, with central government?
Well, maybe I can illustrate it by talking about one particular example. In the first year, we did a lot of work jointly with London councils and government around a package of devolution measures, and I played a quite central role in that in terms of managing a particular relationship with an official within Treasury who was leading on it at their side of things, as well as individual officers talking to the various bits of, because it was across a number of different government departments. But I had a role at the kind of centre of that, just kind of keeping the coordination of that with the official within the Treasury, and working really closely with London councils, and we got a fairly good package of devolution measures there.
Okay. I think it's probably enough for me for the moment. I've seen Assembly Member Arnold.
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. Good morning, gentlemen. I've got a few questions for Nick. And let me just come in, and I'm going back to policy and development and monitoring and its impact. And you gave an example of the Young Londoners Fund, which for me, and having seen the excitement and what many of my constituents are doing with that fund, I would say it's an excellent example of how it fits into a mayor's objective, it seems to me, of an inclusive London for all. So when then I then met up recently with about 20 graduates, fashion designers of BAME heritage, I was a bit put back by what they were telling me about their scepticism about the mayor. They knew the mayor was giving funding to the British Fashion Council in order to work with the London Fashion Week. But they were very sceptical of this and said it was money actually just being paid to buy seats at fashion shows for whoever, because they could not see any changes in terms of, expansion, because basically this is an industry that is known to have problems about racism, sexism, and all sorts of isms. So they asked me if the mayor's policy was to target it, so that the many young designers, creatives, could, if in a sense, be benefiting from this intervention. It would make sense, and that's how they saw it. And I didn't have an answer to them. So how do you, as the policy director, because I would imagine that you were there at the start of this policy development, how do you monitor that to ensure that this valuable resource from Londoners been given, and if it's been targeted, would you not be concerned that it's those who have the most who are benefiting from this, and those young kids who could do with the catwalk show, that there is absolutely no chance of them ever getting one?
Thank you for that. It's a really good question. I can't say I know the exact details of what's funded and what the outputs are.
Do you know the amount of funding?
No, I mean, I'm not a budget holder, so I don't know. I can find out for you.
It's a great deal of money.
I can find out for you. I mean, it does predate us, my understanding. I think it's quite a long-standing investment that has been made by City Hall into the fashion industry, but it's not the only intervention. I think if the Deputy Mayor Simons was here, she'd be able to list off a range of other interventions where we are trying to support young creatives by providing more affordable startup space and support on skills that would be very much targeted on those things that you touch on. I mean, you're right to highlight the challenge around diversity, and I think we're very alert to that. I mean, I can certainly get some more information to you if that's helpful on some of the other areas that we're active in this area.
Yeah, because I mean, you must talk about the policy development and where you would expect the policy and what you would expect from the policy, wouldn't you? Or have you left this solely to the Deputy Mayor?
Well, I mean, the Deputy Mayors do lead on the day-to-day areas of policy and policy delivery. I leave them to that. That is their job. I have a role in coordination. I have a role in making sure that where there's overlaps, people are talking to each other. That is one of those areas, because support for the creative sector, it could be in terms of premises, it could be in terms of skills, it could be in terms of startup. So it is very much one of those areas where teams are working together.
So if these young people were to ask the Mayor, then his reply would be, well, our policy is focusing at the entry level. And basically, if you're, how can you stay with the entry level of any industry? Isn't there development and growth? So doesn't the Mayor have an ambition to see the catwalks representative of London, so that if there's 50 designers there coming from London, then at least 15% of them would be black and Asian minority ethnic heritage? Does he not have this ambition?
Yeah, I'm sure
and would
he does.
you not have that in your thinking, developing policy?
I'm sure he does, but I mean, I think it's one for Deputy Mayor Simons, and I'm very happy to find out more information for you on what we're doing in that area. I think he would totally agree with you on that. Of course he would do.
But nobody's monitoring, so a Deputy Mayor could be just left
No.
tinker with the low end without anybody looking to see what the end goal could be after 4 years.
There is a full corporate monitoring process in place. I think quarter three's version of that is due very shortly, and that's designed exactly to monitor spend and impact.
But you see what I mean? If you talk about a good example of your policy direction or intervention, then when you're challenged about one, that clearly from people who would look to and know of a mayoral intervention linked to a policy about an inclusive London for all, and they are sceptical and cannot see a future. Isn't that worrying?
It is, but it's the first time I've heard of that, and I will certainly take it back and talk to Deputy Mayor Simons.
Okay, I have raised it with officers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Assemblymember Berry.
Thank you. You talked earlier about paying close attention to the outputs from the Assembly. Are you the one who writes the responses to things like reports and motions, or do you coordinate that? Does it run by you?
They're written by the policy teams in the building, but anything that comes back to the committees in the name of the Mayor, and it usually is a letter, would come past me.
Okay, useful to know. And would you say that the Assembly's had a good influence on the Mayor's policies so far?
Yes, I would. I mean, I think
He's hardly going to say no.
Yeah, well, he's got the choice of how to answer.
I'm a policy's my thing, so I'm just genuinely interested in the kind of debate around policy and where new ideas come from and what kind of drives them. And I mean, we don't always agree. It would be somewhat a strange world if we did. And I think that the function that the Assembly and the Assembly's committees perform in that respect is really helpful. Just as similarly, I keep an eye on the work that comes out of Centre for London, or comes out of IPPR, or comes out of Centre for Cities and things like that, because nobody has a monopoly on good ideas.
Yeah, exactly. So part of our job obviously is uncomfortable for you because we're holding the Mayor to account, we're measuring how well he's doing. But a large part of our work on the committees is looking at problems that are faced by Londoners and what the solutions might be. And we put forward things, hopefully, that the Mayor isn't already looking at. Can you give any examples of where we've put something forward that you've gone, oh yes, we need to do that?
Well, I mean, I touched on the report that came out on single-use plastics. I think that's probably the best example of where we.
That's a good example, but a bit of a no-brainer. Is there anything where you were surprised about something and gone, oh yes?
I'm trying to think back now of a good example. I can't think of. I mean, I can go back and look through my notes because I tend to scribble a few notes down, so and then track that back through how things have fed into work that we do. So I'm very happy to come back to you on that with some more information.
I noticed you watch Mayor's Question Time, more or less religiously, I think. Do you ever go away at the end of Question Time and think, oh, I want to follow that up with that Assembly member? I say that because I have 6 minutes generally to talk to them. And quite often I've wanted to sort of follow that up with the Mayor himself. He's quite generous offering his deputy mayors up for meetings, but often things are a little bit less formal than that and could be followed up by you. Do you ever think of doing that?
I have done on some occasions. I'm very happy to. In fact, I will have a word with the Mayor, so perhaps he could offer me up on occasions if that's helpful too. And I'm very happy to meet Assembly members whenever they wish to talk to me about anything related to policy. I have done that already with some Assembly members. I say it to officers in the building to just come and talk to me at my desk if it's something that's more informal, or I'm happy to meet up and have a cup of coffee and talk about it in more detail. Okay, great. And do you have regular meetings with the chairs of our committees? No, I don't actually, no. Should you? It's a good idea, and I don't see why I shouldn't actually, so... As you presumably meet Centre for London quite regularly, so that's the sort of thing. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to. I think it's a good idea. I think I will take that up. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd have a lot more time to get out of the building and talk to policy experts across the city, but such are the pressures sometimes of time. It's never quite as easy as that. But I would take you up on that offer. Okay, thank you.
Before we move on, I'd like to welcome staff and children from Cranbrook Primary School in Redwich. Welcome to you all. What we're doing here is we're asking questions. These gentlemen are two of the Mayor's senior directors, and we're asking them questions about the work that they do on his behalf. I've seen Assemblymember Hall.
Yes, briefly. Nick, did you have anything to do with the policy to remove advertising for fat and sugar and all the rest of it on the on TFL?
Well, I was involved in respect that I was involved in the meetings that my Mayoral Director colleague Leah Kreutzmann convened, which involved TFL, health colleagues, transport colleagues. So, yeah.
So, what all the consequences of that ban, were they discussed before?
In terms of?
In terms of charities not being able to do some of their adverts because they contained cakes, the amount of adverts that are having to be removed because they've got in the background a chocolate bar and everything else, the continued expense of all these companies having to go through their adverts, the fact that the adverts now are going to be put on things like the Metro, etc., so they're going to be everywhere else, and the money's not going to be spent at TFL. The fact that TFL's finances are in such a state, to remove that advertising revenue could have a massive knock-on effect. Were all these things discussed?
I mean, it was, because it's more of a marketing lead, it was led by my Mayoral Director colleague, and I think that they went into the process with their eyes open, fully aware of all of the factors.
So you're fully aware of the consequences of this ban?
Well, I think they
We will now resume, and at this point I'd like to welcome our refreshed guests. Anastasia Beliakova, who is the newish Assistant Director in charge of Assembly Scrutiny Investigations, David Luntz, the Executive Director for Housing and Land, Mary Hartley, the GLA Chief Officer, Head of Paid Service, Martin Clark, the Executive Director of Resources, and Charmaine D'Souza, the Assistant Director of HR and OD. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for your attendance. Item 6, members, is the Chief Officer's Transformation Programme. Mary, could I ask you to briefly introduce that, please?
Thank you. Yeah, good morning, everybody. This tries to describe relatively briefly how I propose to spend the so-called Chief Officer's Transformation funding that came up through the GLA Mayor budget process. The thing I would say about this, you can see, I'm suggesting I'm running an integrated programme of 3 work streams. I don't think there will be much that surprises you in the paper. I think some of the things that need work on are well sort of rehearsed in different forum, in different committees, the Assembly as well. What I've tried to do is bring it together into an integrated programme of change that says, we're going to very much focus on our talent management and talent succession in the GLA, with a particular focus on making sure that we get to a position where our workforce does reflect the population of London, that we spend some effort thinking about the way we work as a GLA staffing body, not least in light of some of our accommodation pressures. And thirdly, that we do use the opportunity of thinking about particularly our HR, IT and facility management teams, of thinking about whether there are opportunities to enter into further shared service arrangements within the GLA group.
Okay, thank you, Mary. You mentioned that you're trying to embed an integrated programme of change. Well, change is often uncomfortable, and the easiest way to do it is to take people with you. So can I just sort of ask an opening question really about how you're doing it? How are you taking it? I mean, starting with, say, your corporate management team, who are responsible for delivering it, and of course the staffing in the wider building. How are you getting their buy-in? How are you taking it with you?
So I think the important thing to sort of reinforce is a lot of this work was already identified as needed, or even in early implementation when I arrived. So I really don't see this as me coming in saying to everybody, oh, by the way, stop what you've been doing, this is what we're going to do now. It absolutely builds on, I think, what was a well understood programme of priorities that the corporate management team had before I arrived. That also extends, I think, to the broader GLA staffing body, whereas if you go back to the staff survey of autumn 2017, a lot of this programme responds directly to concerns that were raised by staff. A lot of this programme responds to concerns that get picked up in our regular workforce report that comes, in fact, to this committee. So I haven't really, I think the requirement on me in the last few months has to be to try to say to people, okay, I've spent some time understanding where this place is at, and here's the programme that I'm putting together, providing some personal leadership to respond to that and help you all with perhaps greater level of focus and greater level of funding in the right places to get this programme delivered.
Okay. Your input to that programme, how do you arrive at your conclusion? So I'm trying to understand how you work and how you think. So do you sit down and ask people questions, basically? So I mean, you're fairly new to the organisation. As you said, there is a programme of change underway already, but you're now responsible for overseeing it. So what is your approach to doing that? Do you see, what I'm getting at is, how did you get from your first day to this? Have you sat down and talked to, I would imagine, your corporate management team would be where you start, and then from there, that might lead you in all sorts of other different directions.
Yes,
So
so it's been it's sort of been multi-layered. So you know, that type of thinking when you're coming in as chief officer actually starts before you've even been recruited, I have to say. So you know, that process started in April, May time, when as part of the recruitment process, both members of the Assembly and the Mayor and some of his senior team made it very clear to me some of the things they felt needed to be looked at by a chief officer coming in. I spent quite a lot of time during the summer before I arrived, doing a lot of reading, but also a lot of talking to the corporate management team. David, of course, was head of paid service in the interim, so starting with him, but also really trying to understand what was already underway, because it did seem to me that there was a lot of work had been done to analyse what needed doing, but perhaps not at the point I arrived, sufficient effort to say, okay, well, let's pull this together and get on with it. So that's really what I've been about. It's been about working with people to say, okay, how are we actually going to get on with this now and prioritise it? And a lot of the reflections I've had back have been, we need to properly resource some of this work, hence my bid to you through the budget process, by the Mayor to the budget process, but we also need to put enough focus on it, and we also need to bring parts of this together. So, you know, Charmaine and her equivalents in FM and IT, three very good assistant directors, probably haven't been brought together enough under some of this programme as well, and that's another thing I'm trying to do. But you know, I haven't had so far resistance to this. In fact, as this programme has been published through this committee's papers, I've had a lot of support for it.
Okay. Any member? Assembly Member Berry.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the ways of working work stream in the light of the amendment that we put to the Mayor's budget to use some of the funding in your transformation fund to look at the feasibility of moving some parts of the GLA to a 4-day working week with the same pay. This is something the Wellcome Trust are going to trial this year in their HQ, and I can see the similarities there might be. And also the potential benefits in terms of our space issues, work-life balance, and whether that might in fact improve overall productivity as it has done in some places. Are you looking at things as radical as that at the moment, and will you?
So we are starting off with very open minds about some of the things, the mechanisms we might use to achieve what we're trying to achieve in ways of working, which I don't think it comes through this paper, but one of the strands of work, for the work that the small consultancy firm are helping us with, does involve going out to other organisations and understanding what they are doing. That process has only just started. So some of us went to on a visit to PwC, a very local visit, last week. There's a visit to Mintail tomorrow. I'm seeing the consultants this afternoon for a regular catch-up with them. What those visits so far have focused on is use of space. But I am going to ask them if there are one or two organisations we can talk to in terms of some of the more, as you say, some of the more sort of potentially radical opportunities for thinking about people's working patterns.
You might talk to the Wellcome Trust.
Well,
they're not far.
They're not far away. No. I would say also we do have an enormous variety of working patterns already within our staffing body. Charmaine's nodding, which I think does reflect how flexible we are and how flexible we have been. But I think underpinning all of this is an issue of consistency and fairness and equity and what opportunities are open to whom and that type of things. And that's partly what I want to bring to this piece of work.
Any other member? Okay, members, we are requested to note this report. Is that agreed?
Noted.
Thank you. Item 7 is the proposed changes to the GLA Establishment, Human Resources and Organisational Development team. Charmaine, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. So I think Mary's paper and her introduction set out that this transformation programme is going to look at a range of areas, and there will be quite a sharp focus on some of the work that needs to be accelerated and brought together under the auspices of HR, so talent attraction, management, diversity and inclusion. And I think it's fair to say, as it does in the last paragraph of the transformation paper, that all of that work over the next period will have a material impact on the shape and function of HR going forward. So my paper really covers the most immediate needs. When I joined in September 2017, the feedback that I had overwhelmingly was that there were two areas. Firstly, that line managers required more support over in terms of managing staff through the HR life cycle, whether that's induction, probation, absence cases, disciplinaries, grievances, etc., and then building that line management capability. And the second area was really around operations. So the growth in the numbers of posts and people, which in fact I set out in the workforce report when I came to this committee in December, has put a real pressure on how we can more efficiently process areas like payroll, how we can hold London Fire Brigade colleagues to account for the payroll services they provide to us, make that more efficient, particularly through better procurement of services, and getting the basics right. We've had a number of cases where staff have been mostly not paid correctly, let's put it that way, and that's not good enough. those are the basics and the hygiene factors that all staff expect of a good HR function. And so these immediate need posts are really focusing on those immediate two areas. That's 3 senior HR officers to support line managers and staff, and then an HR and ward and ops manager that will oversee and bring together some of the posts that currently exist in HR to provide greater oversight.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Come to you in a moment, Senator Duval. I've been looking at your structure charts, which are quite helpful, showing the before and after, so what exists now and what you're proposing for. So I can see 2 of your teams, the corporate project management team and the OD and engagement team, are substantially the same, if not completely identical. Obviously, the HR operations team is the main focus of the restructuring, it's probably fair to say. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think the HR and operations team is going to have to come together and work differently. So currently, the resourcing team, of which we know there's been huge pressure, that's our team that does recruitment, our in-house recruitment team, has had to really cope with the massive demands in terms of 16% turnover and an increasing the numbers of posts. But they have to work really smoothly with our systems for reasons, for example, the fact that we now publish pay gap data. We've just published pay gap data for gender and ethnicity, and all that data stems from the same process. Has to be done correctly, has to be brought together accurately. When we pull off those reports subsequently to report back on pay gap data, we need to be assured that they are accurate. So yes, there's a real focus on bringing the systems together. For example, we have before I joined, we have a recruitment system that is separate to our people data system. I'm sure there was good reason for that, probably timings in terms of procurement. But there's efficiencies we could get through that if we were to have a seamless system that cuts across both those areas. Not least, I think everyone here would agree that rekeying data more than once is not what we should be doing in the digital age. So a real focus for that area and that role will be looking at how we can bring those systems and maybe procurement timetables together to make sure that we are digital and we are using the finite resources best we can.
Okay. Now, on the business partner teams, 1 or 2 changes there as well, and you talked about bringing in 3 senior HR officers. Can you explain to me what the difference between an HR officer and an HR advisor is, please?
Yep, so the HR advisors, their focus on their roles has been really on the complex and high-end casework. Now we've had, whilst I can't talk about individual cases, we know that we want to make sure that our staff have means of raising concerns, bringing grievances. Mary said publicly, and this predates Mary, that we take those very seriously, that staff need to feel confident that they can do that. And the processes that we apply to those situations have to be followed very carefully, both from a technical HR perspective, but also that if we were ever to enter into litigation or an employment tribunal situation, they would look back to see how we used our processes and did we follow our own processes. It's a basic check in that instance. So the HR advisors' focus is on making sure that, that some of that is nipped in the bud, so coaching managers, giving them confidence to get the best out of their staff. Productivity is really important, but equally, if we move into more formal situations, that they are supporting both the staff member and managers through the process, doing it fairly, doing it transparently, and doing it very carefully. So employment law, a good knowledge of our processes, and a sense of how that should be done in the timescales is key to that role.
And so what is the difference then between an HR advisor and an HR officer?
So the HR officers, the 3 HR officers, the new roles, is about adding capacity to the system. The numbers of people has increased. I've set that out.
In the new structure, they appear to have been upgraded to a grade 10, and you've introduced 3 HR officers at the same grade that the advisors previously were at. Can you explain the thinking behind that, please?
Yeah, so when I joined, I think it's fair to say that the structure that I inherited, which was a 6, 8 and 12 structure in that team, was just not fit for purpose. The grade 8s were working well above their, outside of their role profile. The grade senior managers that we really needed to give strategic advice to the business didn't have the capacity to do that. I'm not sure what triggered a greater amount of casework, but probably the increase overall in headcount, and also a sense that that the organisation wanted to be more open in terms of employee relations and have better union relations, better staff relations. So the structure wasn't working. At the time, we undertook a review of some of the grading, and those staff were clearly working well above their grade, and we followed our standard processes and job evaluations to regrade those jobs, and where we really need the capacities at grade 8.
So would I be right then, from what you've just said, that the 3 people who were operating at grade 8 under the old structure have now been bumped up 2 grades to do the same job, but at grade 10?
I think it's fair to say, yes, they have been regraded. It's not unusual for staff to be graded more than 2 grades. That's happened across the organisation. Not a huge amount, but I'm not going to mention individual roles. And we're expecting them to work at a higher grade and to match the complexity that we have in terms of casework.
I'm a bit puzzled by that. As you know from what I used to do in my previous occupation, this is something that I've had some engagement with. And in public sector organisations, when you do a restructure, if you're introducing new roles at a more senior level, then there would normally be an interview process involved, and it would be done at the same time. That isn't what I've just picked up from your answer.
No, I think there's a difference between posts and people. So when the current policies, which I inherited, rightly or wrongly, and we are going to do a review of all our policies, looks at regrading the posts that are in there. Now, some organisations, ones that I've come for in the past, will expect individuals to then go through some sort of competitive process if they are to be slotted into those jobs. But the policy of the GLA that I inherited was, if the regrading is done, the individuals are regraded to that job, and that's happened right across the organisation for some time.
Would that normally coincide with a restructure, or would that be done outside of that? Because you're doing a restructure, and in advance of doing that restructure, you've upgraded 3 positions. That seems very unusual to me.
I'm not. Well, firstly, yes, that's the policy I inherited. I haven't changed GLA process in terms of.
Is that policy followed across the GLA group?
I can't comment across the GLA group. I think they have their own policies and processes. If you're talking about other organisations,
I'm talking about in City Hall, across all teams in City Hall. You are the HR.
Yes, that's the policy. Subject to budget being available, managers take a decision about regrading. It comes to HR for a regrading decision. I'm not restructuring I'm not restructuring the team as is. We've regraded certain posts to a high level, and we're looking for capacity at grade 8.
I mean, that does sound like a restructure, though. Yeah. I have to say. I mean, this seems a bit irregular. I've not encountered this before, where you would upgrade posts and move people into those higher level posts, and then do hiring to backfill those positions. That's why I started asking you the difference between an advisor and an officer. I'm still not clear on what the difference is. You said it's about capacity. Fine. If it's about capacity, then you add 3 more people at grade 8. I don't see why that means that you necessarily create more senior positions and put those 3 people into those positions, and I haven't really heard an answer yet.
Can I come in?
So I think there are a couple of things that are probably worth saying. So the first is, so I've recently been exposed to our regrading processes and policies, and here's my view, we need to look at them. I've talked to the committee previously in the paper last month, where I talked about my sort of forward plan, and one of them is to look at the possibility of reviewing the pay and grading system. That's now 15 years old. We see an awful lot of regrading requests coming through the system, which are, in the time I've been here, I've often heard blamed on the fact that the pay and review, the grading structure is so out of date. So we are starting the work on that. I think we're planning to come to Oversight in March with our early thinking on that, and I think we will come and talk to you too about regrading. Because they are popping up all over the place.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, and one of the problems that we have...
The second bit I was going to say is this is not meant to be a restructure of HR. This is a request for some additional capacity to meet current demand.
We'll come into you, sorry.
In a similar way, as you had a paper from David Munn in December, which was about some additional capacity for immediate demand. As my transformation paper says, that the thinking that we're going to do through that transformation programme leads directly to questions about the right structure going forward for HR, for IT and for FM, actually.
But with the greatest of respect, I do need to come back to this. This is a restructure of HR. The structure charts are materially different from and it actually says future structure and current structure. It's a restructuring. And I accept that, of course, you'll get lots of regrading requests, because, of course, one of the problems you have in the public sector is that when you get to the top of the band, the pay band, unless you are regraded or promoted to a higher position, you can't get a pay rise other than the usual increment. So I understand the pressure and the problem. The problem I've got sitting on this side of the table is that this looks very much like 3 people have been promoted without an interview process, and you're backfilling their positions. Now, when you're doing a restructure, which this chart makes very clear that you are, as well as introducing extra capacity, and I accept that there is an argument for that, the other thing that you do is bring in new talent. And it gives you the opportunity to restructure your entire team, and that doesn't appear to have happened here. Would this be acceptable in any other team across the GLA? Because they would all want to do this, I'm sure.
It would be stopped.
It wouldn't happen.
It wouldn't happen. I don't understand this issue, Chair. I'm sorry, you're going to have to come in. I'm just listening to this, going backwards and forwards. It would be stopped, because eventually what you've done by the regrading is you're confusing the re-evaluation of a post, and then you're creating new posts that have not even been properly advertised because of the individual. And I don't want to do that, the individual who's being re-evaluated. But in terms of this issue, I mean, I don't understand why we're even having the conversation, really. Because, so let's be very clear about this, right? And I'm very grateful that you got 3-4 in a paragraph, but I'm not convinced. And I think, Charmaine, you're constantly let down by poor performance by people beneath you. And it's common across the GLA. It's not just us. I can only recount some of the issues that I still get told about when it comes to my group and some of the recruitment processes that we get advised, or issues that arise from it. And I'm not convinced more money of this is going to solve this. So, I'm open for suggestions, and I'm quite supportive of an HR function, but I'm not supportive of what looks like, and I'm all for people getting re-evaluated and being paid the rate for the job if they're doing above it. So I've got no problem around that. But if you're going to do it, I think we need a proper review here. I thought this was a review as such. But when you see that someone by re-evaluation has been almost slotted into the new post that you've done because of the re-evaluation, it does seem unfair in the organisation. And quite honestly, Charmaine, you in HR would say no to other people if they were doing it, unless there was political pressure with a small p or a large p that it had to happen. And I just don't understand that, how this has occurred and why we think it's all right across the other side of the table with a shrug of the shoulders. I don't think this is all right. I don't think looking at the members that we're with can support this, to be honest. And I do worry about the improvement of performance. I do understand the level of work. What I don't understand in HR practices is the level of inconsistency in the advice given and causing further and greater problems in terms of doing the work of this organisation. And I don't think we can go on in this way.
I don't have enough history here yet. I don't understand why this is the first one of these that has come to the committee's attention in this way. Because in our current regrading policy, this fits within that. And I think Charmaine did tell us just now that actually this would happen elsewhere in the GLA.
I just don't believe that.
So, I mean,
with respect, Mary, I think I'd like written evidence of that. I think, I mean, what we're picking up here is significant discomfort from members on this. I'm not going to propose that we accept this report on the basis of this. I think we need to have another conversation about that, and I would like some evidence that this is the accepted practice across the group, because if it is, I'm completely unaware of it.
Will it change?
And if it is, it's something I think we should stop, because I think if you're going to restructure things, the opportunity to refresh your talent pool and improve it shouldn't be missed. So I'm not prepared to sign this off. Are members content with my summary of that?
Yes.
Assemblymember Berry.
Just to quibble, I'm looking at the legal guidance in the report, and it does say a major restructure is only anything other than 5. Are we able to intervene in this way? I mean, morally, I guess we can send the report back, as we've done with any question that we have, but I don't know if it actually qualifies as enough of a change for us to act like
Well, I
this.
think we'll take the view of the committee. I mean, do members want to accept the report?
No.
We can do that on any grounds.
Yeah, but I've brought the report to you knowing you would want a view on this.
Yeah.
If I'd have felt that it doesn't reach a threshold to talk to you about, I wouldn't have brought it. I'd have done it under the other process.
I'm very happy to provide evidence. I don't want to go into the detail here of other posts that have been regraded, but they are right across the
What I suggest that we do to get over the logjam is that we defer final decision on this report until next month's meeting.
Okay.
In between times, I think further documentation from the Head of Paid Service and the Assistant Director for HR would be appreciated, and then we'll come to a view at the next meeting. I think you've got full wind of our concerns here, so hopefully we'll be able to iron those out in between times. Assemblymember Arnold.
Would a pre-briefing be useful with the evidence that we're going to see? It's not that I want to take anything in camera. It's, I just think what would be useful the next time the paper comes is a pre-briefing.
I think if we can get, potentially, I mean, I'm just thinking about timescales and diaries is the only cause of hesitation here, because of course it's much better to do things openly, but I think if you can circulate documents via electronically to members can discuss. If we can find time for a pre-briefing in advance of the meeting, then fine. Otherwise we'll have it out in the meeting.
Can I just go back to you? I said, because if we're going to be provided information of this and it is widespread, and I can imagine it is widespread, because it falls under the threshold that my colleague has identified, where it's up to managerial and indeed the chief officer's directives to move their staff around. We could have quite a lot of information to deal with, which we might just want to explore in a briefing.
I think it's very important. I think it's an interesting point, because if it's widespread, I think there are equal opportunity issues arising, and we probably broke our equal opportunity policies. Because I'm not convinced in terms of how that process, or not, depending on the evidence you give us.
It might be GLA. It might be GLA custom and practice, which.
To break their equal opportunities policy.
Well, why not?
Well, I think think this is the thing. I mean,
It comes back to the policy we have on regrading, I think.
I think if this is symptomatic of how recruitment and restructuring is done across the GLA group, then you've got some very concerned members looking at you, Mary, and this is an opportune moment, I think. So, and if this is what the HR department, who will oversee everything else, does, then, you know, the cause for discomfort is greater. So I think we'll proceed as suggested.
Have a briefing.
Well, let's get the documentation first. If we can, we will.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll get it into the agenda for the next meeting. Is that agreed, members?
Yeah, let's have a briefing.
Look at the
Okay,
word issues.
agreed. Right, so we'll move on now to find my procedure note again. Agenda item 8, which is the proposed changes to the GLA Establishment City Operations Unit. Mary, this is you again.
Yes, so I hope almost everybody on the committee present this morning has attended one of the fuller briefings on our plans for this city operations team. So we're looking to put in a 24/7 scanning of what is happening across London so that we can always be certain about what is and what isn't happening and respond appropriately. 9 roles consulting on to fulfil that function.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we have, I think all members have had that briefing. I know for myself I have. It was very useful. Assemblymember Cotley.
Thank you. Yes, I was wondering about the lines of accountability for this role within the GLA. Who will they be accountable to?
There is a chart at the back that shows that they report into...
71.
Thank you.
Yes, page 71, thank you. City Operations and Major Events Lead, who we already have, reporting into the Assistant Director for External Relations.
Isn't that a bit of a strange line of accountability? Obviously, it seems to me this is... Because isn't it being funded via resources, not external relations?
It is being so in the budget, because of course this featured in the budget papers as well, the new funding for it, we nested under corporate management team because we were uncertain at the time where it would sit. I think it is fair to say, without muddying the waters, because I'm keen to move on with this now through this consultation, I am separately giving some thought to the broader resilience, business continuity picture, of which this is part. It's a very, very important part. And in that, giving some thought to, well, where does accountability for that sit?
Right.
So, you know, we'll come back with that. But at
the moment it's there.
The person to whom this team currently reports to the person who is aiding external relations, and we're going to keep it like that.
Right,
in the immediate term.
So that's what's happening at the moment. But it just struck me that
right.
it would seem to make more sense for it to come under resources under Martin than
or certainly more directly accountable into the corporate management team, given its breadth.
Okay, but you're saying that's
we haven't tackled that in this paper.
It's up for review. It's not set in stone. Okay,
certainly,
thank you.
and that will feature in a future conversation.
Thank you.
Any other member on this?
No.
Right, we're requested to respond to the report. I think subject to Assemblymember Copley's query, which you're satisfied with the answer on. Shall I suggest we note the report? Thank you, members. Item 9, proposed changes to the GLA Establishment Housing and Land Directorate. David.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This report follows from a report that we brought in November 17. And at that time, we said that we were looking to negotiate additional funding to do more with affordable housing in London, and that once we'd settled the account with government, hopefully successfully, that we may need additional resources reflecting the additional budgets and targets associated with those negotiations. A month or so ago, we agreed 18 additional posts for the Royal Docks team, which reflected the agreement of the Mayor and the London League to the enterprise zone funding, which funded those posts. And these additional 29 posts before you today reflect the outcome of those broader negotiations. So just to recap, we have in the last 12 months secured something around a doubling of the affordable housing programme and associated budgets in London. from around 4 billion to around 8 billion of funding, and substantially increased targets. We're now committed to 116,000 affordable starts, which is a 29% increase in affordable housing starts compared to where we were a year ago. And in addition, we've been very successful to acquire additional funding in principle to substantial amounts of funding through the Housing Infrastructure Fund. As colleagues will know, there's about 1.5 billion of new money coming into London boroughs for their council home building programme. Just before Christmas, we signed off on nearly £500 million of new money with government to support the Mayor's Land Fund, and we've also got substantial new funding to support initiatives around street homelessness and community housing. And it's also, I think, worth saying that associated with that additional funding and those additional targets, the work that my team is responsible for is getting a good deal more complex. We're increasingly moving into areas of land transactions that involve quite complicated negotiations, deals and contracts, partnership ventures and joint ventures and so forth. So the proposals here are the conclusion of a piece of work reviewing the resources that we currently have in the Directorate. We've looked very carefully at what we can do differently and more efficiently. We've looked at how we can share responsibilities around the different teams in my Directorate, but I think it is, I think without doubt, we will be compromised in delivering our targets and our budgets over the next 2 or 3 years if we don't have some additional resources to help us. And as the report mentions, if you look at the government's own affordable housing agency, Homes England, it currently has an affordable housing target marginally above ours. They're responsible for delivering 130,000 affordable starts against our 116,000. But they currently have 550 posts, whereas we have 129. And Homes England's corporate plan commits them to doubling their staffing to 1,100 over the next 18 months, whereas I'm suggesting at this stage just an additional 29 posts. So I would also just add, Chairman, if I may, that 7 of the posts here are temporary to permanents. So we have taken on temporary staff over the last year or so, bit by bit, to deal with these additional programmes and targets that have come through. We want to make 7 of those posts permanent now. And 8 of them are a new initiative that we're taking. We're calling it Futures Associates. These are entry-level grades, 8 posts that we want to take into the team and coach and mentor them through and hopefully see them into a career progression strategy as part of the team. So again, they are entry-level posts. They're relatively inexpensive, but we think that there's a lot of value in growing our own talent. The additional posts cover a range of functions, as you would expect, ranging from our homelessness programmes, the future associates I've mentioned, our land and property team and our area operations teams. I think importantly as well, just 2 final points if I may. One is that all the posts that are here before you today are budget neutral because all of the costs are being suggested to be absorbed against either GLAP, which is the GLA's land and property company. Any work that's associated directly with assets and land within GLAP has to be recharged to that capital budget, and so virtually a half of the costs here will be recharged there. Nearly a half of the additional costs are to be charged against the affordable housing interest on the repayment of grant. So housing associations who sell shared ownership units, they have to repay their grant and recycle that into additional affordable housing. Any interest on that account comes back to the GLA, and that's where we are intending to take the bulk of the additional costs. And then in addition to that, there is some recharge back to programmes that we've secured from government through things like the rough sleeping programme and others. And then the final point I would make is that, as I think we discussed at the last meeting in relation to the additional staff at the Royal Docks team, we are intending to, well, not intending to, we are planning with our colleagues at TfL Recruitment on a much more ambitious and strategic targeted campaign to promote the work of the Directorate and get a wider range of interest from a more diverse range of potential candidates to come and work in our Housing and Land Directorate. So this is another opportunity, I think, to test new ways of recruitment with a view to achieving a workforce that's more representative of London's population.
Remember? Okay, just a couple for me then before we accept the report. How long do you envisage the recruitment process taking? 28 posts is quite a lot.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the Royal Docs recruitment process is underway, and we hope to launch that at the end of next month, end of February. The intention here is that we will launch in the late spring, early summer. So we're sort of targeting May, June to go live at the moment.
And how long are you envisaging it taking?
Well, we're going to be staging this, so I think we should have the first posts recruited by back end of the summer. But the complete
when you say recruited, do you mean people actually here working, or do you mean they've been made offers?
Well, a combination, I guess. I mean, it will depend who's appointed and notice terms, but I would certainly hope that we'd have the first people, in the teams and appointed and working by certainly early autumn. But I think realistically, it's likely to take us through to, the back end of the calendar year at least to complete the process.
Okay. How the positions are fitting into the current structures? Are these new teams, or are these people going into pre-existing teams?
No, there are no new teams here. This is absolutely, there's no restructuring proposal here. Okay. This is posts being slotted into existing teams.
Okay. I mean, the reason for asking the question, actually, apart from the restructuring element of that, was the order in which you're going to start doing the recruitment and what the logic behind it is. I mean, have you had some thought to that?
Yeah, and unsurprisingly, we'll be looking to try and recruit to the more senior posts as quickly as possible, because where possible, we would obviously like them to have some involvement in the choice of recruits to their team. And we're still sorting out the phasing plans with TfL colleagues. I'm pretty confident that we can get something out in terms of the kind of roadshow and promotional and marketing material that we'll be using, and that will be a wide generic plan. So we're going to be looking to promote the work of the team more as widely as possible, and then look to tranche up the specific recruitment phases.
Okay. Right, any members off the back of that discussion? Okay, can I recommend that we note the report and further note that there is a net nil impact on GLA budgets as a result of the proposals? Thank you. Item 10 is the funding of settled status applications for the GLA. In the absence of Laura Hayward, who's on my procedure note, would you like to cover this one, Shani?
Yes, this report, of course, was written and submitted before the change in the government position on funding fees for EU workers. Our estimations were that we have approximately 30 GLA staff who would be eligible. So the paper sets out if the fees were to be applied, what that cost would be. I think it was important that we continue to bring this report for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's not completely clear yet how the government, although they've made a commitment to waive this fee, what the implications might be longer term. But secondly, also that we are not yet clear whether any of our staff or EU citizens had entered into the pilot schemes for the government settled status. So a pilot's been running, and of course the government has said that they would reimburse those costs, but of course some of our employees will have already paid, so hopefully the reimbursement will come through from government for those. So and potentially our EU staff network have set out that there could be further support that's required. So whilst on the face of the current government position, it looks like we won't have to cover these costs. The paper still stands as is.
Thank you very much. Unless any member has a comment on this, I suggest we accept the report. Thank you. Item 11 relates to People's Question Time, coming up in one of the two most fabulous boroughs in London on the 14th of March. Does any member wish to comment?
No. Well, I'm so sorry, I won't be able to join you. Can I come for tea on another occasion?
You certainly can, and actually if I'd had my preferred choice of venue, you'd been able to do it straight after this one, because it's right next to my house, but unfortunately I'm going somewhere else. So, members, can we note the report?
Noted.
Thank you very much. Item 12 is the Secretariat's quarterly review for Q3. Anastasia, would you like to introduce this?
Certainly. Although I would like to go through every single committee that we have produced work on over the past quarter, if I may, Chairman, I'll just name a few highlights that we've had recently. So I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the work that we have done on Crossrail, which has covered both the Transport and the Budget and Performance committees. I would say that both yourself and Assembly Member Pigeon have become the spokespeople to go to for London News on the assessment of how the Mayor has fared in looking at the Crossrail work. This work is ongoing over the next quarter. A couple of other mentions that I would like to make is the BAME organ donation event that we had last week. And finally, also the Environment Committee report on aviation noise, which received quite a lot of coverage, particularly in the print press, such as The Times and The Independent.
Emma. Can I suggest we note the report then? Agreed. Thank you, Anastasia.
Can I just say, I would just remind the Director of the amazing work the Assembly is doing on backing the plaque.
Yes, backing the plaque.
Always an opportunity to raise back the plaque.
Would you like to, just for the benefit of the camera,
the benefit of the camera,
and the millions watching around the world,
millions watching, send us the names of anyone you think deserves a London plaque.
And we're talking specifically about women?
And we're talking about women of all sizes, heights, ethnicities, anyone that you believe deserves a London plaque, a blue plaque. Send the names in to us.
Okay, we've had the plug. We'll move on. Item 13 is the work programme for the Oversight Committee. Can we note the work programme for 18-19? Agreed. Thank you, members. Item 14 is the date of the next meeting, which will be Wednesday, the 27th of February 2019, in Committee Room 5 at 10 o'clock in the morning. Members, please note, under item 15, I have accepted a supplementary item of urgent business.
Yes.
Remember that the paper's been circulated, so members do have it in front of you, but I will read into the record the following recommendations. So can I ask the committee to agree the following recommendations? That the committee, under the provisions of section 61(1)(b) of the Greater London Authority Act 1999 as amended, require Mike Brown, MVO, Commissioner of Transport for London, Andy Brown, Head of Corporate Affairs, Transport for London, Howard Carter, General Counsel, Transport for London, Charles Ritchie, Legal Manager, Transport for London, and Alex Williams, Director of City Planning, Transport for London. Under section 61(2)(a) of the Greater London Authority Act 1999 as amended, to provide copies of any notes, text messages and or social media messages sent or received in the time period 1st of March 2018 to the 25th of January 2019 between the Garden Bridge Trust and or the Trust's professional advisors and the aforementioned officers of Transport for London. The July 2018 letter from Mervyn Davis, trustee of the Garden Bridge Trust, sent to Andy Brown, Head of Corporate Affairs, and referenced in the 26th of July 2018 email to Andy Brown from Jane Highwood, Finance Manager, Garden Bridge Trust, and the letter dated the 14th of September 2018 from Mervyn Davis, initially sent to Andy Williams and also attached in an email from Paul Morell to Andy Brown of 28th of September 2018. The documents are to be provided no later than 2 weeks from the date of notice requiring these documents. Is that agreed, members?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much, members. There's no other business, so the meeting is closed.
GLA Chamber Sound.